Kim, what's on your radar today?
Well, the U.S. prides itself on being a beacon of freedom and democracy. Part of being this beacon is championing our free press. A free press brings information to the public no matter how unsavory that information may be or how bad that information may make some people look. And not everybody will agree with the information they're hearing. Part of having a free press is dissent and disagreement. Part of it is exposing people who are in power. Part of it is exposing the dark parts that the government doesn't want seen. Unfortunately, as free of a country as we'd like to think we are, the U.S. government establishment has a sordid history of going after journalists who expose details they don't want exposed. Julian Assange is the big one we talk about here on this show, and he's a divisive figure. Not everyone agrees that Julian Assange is even a journalist or a publisher. Some believe that he's a nefarious actor working as an enemy of the state. They view him not as a journalist, but as someone who hacks, then leaks classified information against the U.S. military and politicians. Never mind the fact that what he's exposed are war crimes and crimes against democracy. And though many of us have called for the U.S. government to back down against Julian Assange, that going after him leads to grave implications against journalists who expose government tyranny that's being hidden behind classified labels, the government has not backed down. They've doubled down. Julian Assange has not murdered a single person. He's not dangerous to any of us walking on the streets, nor is he harmful to any one of us who come into contact with him. Yet he's been in confinement for about a decade, and if successfully extradited to the United States, he faces over 100 years in prison, obviously a life sentence. Now, what was his crime? Publishing documents that exposed U.S. war crimes, and more recently, documents that put Hillary Clinton and the DNC in a negative light. Now, some people argue Julian Assange was a political operative helping Donald Trump win the election, and therefore that makes him not a journalist, but instead a political operative. But how does propping one candidate over another make him any different than most mainstream news outlets? That right there doesn't seem like a very good argument against him being a journalist. I mean, WikiLeaks has, as an outlet, been willing to go places other outlets are unwilling to go. They're willing to expose the most powerful of the most dangerous crimes, all the while risking putting themselves in the crosshairs. Most journalists will publish salacious stories, but most journalists have a limit when it comes to how far they'll go in exposing people in power, especially the people in power who are their friends. And if you're a true journalist and you have no friends, then when you find yourself hunted by the U.S. government, you will find yourself with few allies rushing to your rescue, at least powerful allies, that is. And now unfolding in real time in front of us is another Julian Assange-like figure. Controversial, disliked, and the label of whether or not he's a real journalist is being debated. Project Veritas's James O'Keefe. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Project Veritas, PV is a right-wing outlet that publishes a lot of undercover video and secret recordings designed to expose left-wing organizations and outlets. They target entities such as Planned Parenthood and CNN, amongst many others. A lot of people hate them, but a lot of people love them. But like Julian Assange, James O'Keefe is accused by many of not just publishing videos, conversations, and documents of powerful people and entities, but of procuring those documents in non-journalistic and possibly illegal ways. Like Julian Assange, James O'Keefe is being hunted by the U.S. government. The excuse they're using is Ashley Biden's diary. Just before the 2020 election, pages of what was allegedly Ashley Biden's diary were published by conservative news outlet National File. The diary contained explosive allegations of very inappropriate sexual thoughts and behavior, possibly implicating her father. No one really paid attention to the publication at the time. It didn't make news. Then suddenly, about 10 days ago, news broke that the FBI had raided a couple of homes connected to Project Veritas over the alleged theft of Ashley Biden's diary. And just to be clear, when the National File published pages of what they claimed was Ashley Biden's diary, people weren't sure if it was real. But after the FBI raided a couple of homes in connection to an investigation regarding the theft of Ashley Biden's diary, I think it's pretty clear to us now that the diary was in fact hers. And by the way, if their goal was to protect Joe Biden, they did the exact opposite. Or, maybe this is the plan. Maybe this is how he ends up a one-term president. Maybe this is the excuse the Democratic Party uses in order to usher in a more youthful, maybe more likable Democrat in 2024. Who knows? But back to Project Veritas. How Project Veritas became involved in all of this is because the National File claimed they received pages from the diary from someone inside Project Veritas. Project Veritas claims they were shown the diary by someone who claimed it was left behind by Ashley Biden. At the time, Project Veritas could not authenticate the diary and chose not to publish it. And even more head-scratching to this whole story, they actually gave the diary back to law enforcement so law enforcement could find its rightful owner. But because National File claims they received the pages from Project Veritas, and because the FBI and DOJ are investigating the theft of Ashley Biden's diary, that led to the raiding of the homes of people inside Project Veritas. Basically, the FBI and DOJ suspect someone inside Project Veritas broke into Ashley Biden's residence and stole her diary. And now the FBI has been going through Project Veritas's private attorney-client communications and leaking them to the New York Times. We know this because on Friday, the New York Times published a piece about the attorney-client communications in an attempt to expose Project Veritas. And isn't it sheer irony that the New York Times publishes documents that were illegally given to them in order to expose an outlet they despise because that outlet regularly publishes content that's illegally given to them? Now, listen, a couple of points I really want to make. First of all, you might hate James O'Keefe. You might hate Project Veritas. You might think what they do is despicable and the content they publish is unethical. But so long as James O'Keefe is not committing the crime of hacking or theft himself, publishers are allowed to publish anything they are given or stumble upon, just like what the New York Times just published. The second point I want to make is that many of us have thought the reason Julian Assange is so heavily pursued is because both sides of the establishment protect the War Department. Julian Assange was exposing war crimes. Yes, he also went after the DNC and Hillary Clinton and John Podesta, but he mostly exposed war crimes. And many of us know, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. When it comes to foreign policy, it's two sides of the same coin. The current witch hunt against James O'Keefe sort of calls all of this into question a bit. O'Keefe goes after Democrats, and with Democrats in power and O'Keefe being the target, and with Obama going after more journalist sources than any other president in history, and with Democrats calling for censorship of whatever they consider to be fake news and misinformation, which often ends up being real news and real information, it calls into question the ethics of the Democratic Party when it comes to press freedom. Are they for press freedom only when it fits their agenda? Is Julian Assange paying this steep price because he exposed war crimes or Democrats? Is James O'Keefe also looking at a lonely life of isolation if he continues to go after Democrats? We, the people, are under the belief that the United States of America is the beacon of freedom and democracy, the beacon of a free people and a free press. Yet we continue to witness, time and time again, evidence that the press isn't so free. And in this case, literally. And I want to mention that at least the ACLU has stepped up and they have issued a statement defending James O'Keefe, saying, yeah, we might think he's despicable, we might not like the guy, but raiding his home, the FBI raiding his home over this is absolutely crossing the line, and that journalists need to step up and really voice, those are my words now, I believe that journalists across the country need to step up and say more for Julian Assange, which so many remain quiet about, and now for James O'Keefe. Like, I get it, you might hate both of them, but it's totally besides the point. The press is under attack. And from my view, it's unfortunately coming more from Democrats than any other area. And that is extremely concerning for me. What is your take on this, Emily?
You know, I agree with a lot of what you said, and the ACLU is a really good example here of, like, this is exactly why the ACLU exists. And I think you made a really important point that the reason the government gets away with its treatment of Julian Assange is because he's a threat to both sides of the establishment. And I think one thing that played out and is continuing to play out with the Assange case study is that the government is terrified by the democratization of the media that's been induced by the internet. And that means you can have James O'Keefe, it means you can have Julian Assange, it means you can have The Intercept, The Federalist, you don't just have the New York Times. And by the way, Project Veritas and O'Keefe is implying he thinks the FBI actually leaked this to the New York Times because nobody else knew about it.
How else they get it?
Right, yeah, exactly. And so I think that is an important point. I do think Project Veritas does some things that I would consider unethical, and I don't know what happened in this case. I do know that the National File, I think there probably is a relationship between O'Keefe and that website, but whether that means that O'Keefe had anything to do with it publishing the diary, I have not seen any evidence for that. The FBI has not presented any evidence for that. The government has not presented any evidence of that. We have no idea, based on what they've come and told us, why we should believe that James O'Keefe himself deserves to have his home raided. So I think it is very fair for people to interpret this as a warning sign that journalists who are working against the establishment interests can sort of just be raided by the FBI.
Right, and the FBI argument doesn't quite scan here. If Project Veritas was actively involved with stealing the diary,
Right.
they would therefore be able to authenticate it.
Right.
If they stole it from her bedside table at a rehab, they would know it was hers.
Exactly.
And so the fact that they turned it over to the FBI rather than publishing it, suggests that their claim that a source gave it, that somebody, and it does not seem implausible that somebody in rehab would say, "Oh, you're the future president's daughter, and I see you're writing a diary. I'm going to steal that diary and I'm going to leak it to what they consider to be Republican operatives."
Right.
So yeah, and that's the thing about the First Amendment and press protections, is that if they don't apply to the people that you find the most odious, then they don't apply at all.
Right.
And so
Right.
and people have to remember that.
That's a good point.
Right. And I think that's the ultimate point that we want to make, because a lot of people are really against Julian Assange. They're really against
They sure
both of
are.
these characters. And, it is, we have to be able to uphold these, like you said, Ryan, even when you hate them. So.
Well, thank you, and we will have more Rising right after this.